Hi everyone, this is Travels with an Archaeologist. I'm the archaeologist, now let's get into the travels. So today we're in the Dead Sea, and I've got a few different sites for you today from either 2 or 3 different countries depending on how you count Palestine, and no, I am not going to discuss that right here on this video. I've already made a video touching on how complex that is, and you can take it up with that one. The Dead Sea is a body of water that straddles the border between Israel and Jordan before extending into the West Bank. It's known for having one of the highest of all salt concentrations on Earth with an astonishing 34% salinity. To put that into perspective, the ocean has an average of 3.5%. And no, nothing lives in it, and drinking the water will almost certainly kill you if you're not near a large enough source of fresh water, which is why it's called the Dead Sea. Now, despite its name, the Dead Sea is actually a lake. And to put it lightly, this is not a lake to swim in if you are prone to getting water in your eyes, or any other orifice for that matter. It got this salty by taking in a lot of water but having no outflow, so the water evaporates and leaves the salt behind rather than carrying it off into a channel and recycling it into the sea. The salt is said to have healing properties, and as such the sea has always been a bit of a destination as well as a great place to collect salt. And it is indeed very, very easy to float on the Dead Sea, as the high salinity makes anything else incredibly buoyant. The water used to be much higher, as can be seen by this medieval Arab port, but the sea has slowly been drying up. Conservation efforts by both Jordan and Israel to return the flow of the Dead Sea without affecting their own irrigation have been unsuccessful, which means that the Dead Sea might actually be drying up faster than usual, putting an end to this tourist attraction for good. There is some hope for it, as both Israel and Jordan seem to be genuinely willing to try and cooperate on this, so we'll have to see what they come up with and if it's a viable solution. So that's it for the background information on the Dead Sea, the lake itself. Now let's move on to the actual sites around it, and let's start in Jordan. The city you're probably looking at staying, or at least the city you're looking at staying near when you go to the Dead Sea through Jordan, is Madaba. And there's 2 things of particular interest in Madaba, the first being the Madaba map, which is the world's oldest map of the Holy Land. It was created between 542 and 570 CE based on the dating of the buildings depicted on the map, which would place it firmly in the Byzantine era. But more than being noted for its age, it's also known for its accuracy and detail. Archaeological excavations have revealed that Jerusalem city streets did used to once match the ones of those depicted on this map in Madaba. This map used to be much bigger, and while archaeologists still argue about its original purpose, whether for pilgrimage or navigation, they all agree that less than half the map survives. And it certainly took a lot of geographic information from the Bible. Why was this map here? Well, again, it's not really known. It could be that these maps were more common and just don't survive, or it could be that a certain rich individual lived here and sponsored it. Madaba was a rather large city in the Byzantine era, after all. As for me, I think it might have something to do with this being a point of pilgrimage, and I'm not alone in thinking that by any means. Right above Madaba sits Mount Nebo, where it's rumored that Moses stood when he first looked over the Promised Land. He was ultimately buried there. In biblical times, this was the land of Moab, but today you can look over the horizon and you can see the northern end of the Dead Sea and across it to where the Hebrews would make their kingdom. On a clear day, you can even see Jerusalem. At least I've been told. I wasn't there on the clearest of days, if I'm honest. Now, I've spoken at length about biblical accuracy and how it corresponds with archaeology, and I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but in this instance, archaeology must contradict the Bible. Sadly, not only is there no evidence that Moses existed, but further investigation into his story reveals certain anachronisms, and it uses slang which is a bit too developed for when Moses is supposed to have lived. There is no evidence of a large-scale exodus from Egypt from the period when Moses is supposed to have existed, or even really at all around a realistic period we could date him to. And the Judean kingdom seems to have been created thanks to local shepherds settling down combined with a withdrawal of the Egyptian authorities rather than an influx of new migrants. And again, you clicked on Travels with an Archaeologist. You can't expect me not to speak about archaeological evidence. And that doesn't mean Mount Nebo isn't a cool place to visit. After all, real or not, the story of Moses has shaped our society, and seeing anything associated with it is to gain insight into our own cultural and religious traditions. And again, archaeology is open-minded. Just because we don't have proof Moses existed doesn't mean that he didn't. It might mean that evidence is still waiting to be found and that his story was exaggerated, or that our traditional timeline is way off. So am I denying Moses? No, but I am denying him as we currently understand his story, and I am giving you that the archaeological evidence does not support his existence as of yet. And one of the ways we can better understand his story, and indeed the Bible in general, is the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, I did want to put the Dead Sea Scrolls in this video, but it turns out there's actually a lot to say about them, especially for somebody like me who actually does speak ancient Hebrew. I had the script written for this whole video, which included the Dead Sea Scrolls, with the research done, and I just kept cutting material to make it fit, until I realized this really is better as two videos, with the Dead Sea Scrolls being their own separate video. So that is what I'm going to do. So stay tuned for that video in the future. I will link it to this one once it's out. Nevertheless, I am going to talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls just a little bit, enough to mention that they are found at this site, Qumran, which is in the West Bank. Now, Qumran is associated with the Essenes, a Jewish sect mentioned by Josephus. But again, there was so much to say on this that I would rather do it properly rather than give you a speedier version of events than I already do. There are so many sites at the Dead Sea to discuss, and many of them are natural. Take this mountain, called Mount Sodom. This mountain is full of salt, but there is absolutely no evidence of a city ever being there. Sorry. This desert, the Judean desert, is almost a relic in itself for its cultural importance to the Bible and, by extension, our own Western historical contexts. It was home to numerous hermit figures, most famous of which was John the Baptist, and it's believed that somewhere along here may be the literal Valley of the Shadow of Death, although no one's located it. As to Gomorrah, the location isn't even guessed at. Anyway, getting out of Qumran, which is in the disputed West Bank, and into Israel proper just down the road, we run into the Ein Gedi oasis. Now, if you're into pilgrimage, this one is a fun one for you. It's where David is said to have hid from King Saul during his brief exile. Now, I have said in a previous video that David's existence is debated, but also that I do believe that this is a figure who actually did exist. I will again put the proof of such back up on the screen, the arguments both for and against. But was his exile a later myth? And did he really hide here? Well, let's assume that David was real, and let's assume that his exile was real. I still wouldn't be able to tell you for sure, and we will probably never know. Naturally, one man hiding alone in an oasis is not going to leave much of an archaeological record. But this is a great oasis to come to, especially to get your feet wet and cool off in the clear, fresh water and enjoy the greenery. This has always acted as a haven for travelers to the Dead Sea, and why should you be an exception? The only recommendation I'll make is to save this for the late afternoon when the temperature reaches the maximum to get the full feel of it. And this oasis is important because it served as an easy source of fresh water for the Romans, specifically the ones who came to besiege Masada. Yes, I've saved the most famous for last, that being Masada, the site of the Jewish rebellion. Now, there's a lot of archaeology to see here, so let's give you the briefest of histories of Masada so we can dive right into it. In 66 CE, the Judeans erupted in a revolt against the Romans who controlled the area. This led to the burning of the Second Temple in Jerusalem, but this burning did not actually end the revolt. Although it did pacify Jerusalem, the rebels fled here to Masada, which had initially been built as a palace for Herod the Great. The Romans came with a full legion to destroy these few dozen rebels just to make a point, and after some effort managed to break through the walls of Masada. But when they entered, all the rebels were dead, killed by their own hands, with all the food and water still laying out. Better dead than Roman was the clear message. Jewish communities have long taken strength from this last stand, and in the medieval era there are multiple records of Jews preferring suicide to letting themselves be captured by those who would do far worse to them. And to this day, Israeli soldiers will still take an oath of allegiance to Israel at the top of Masada, vowing to never let it fall again. Now, while some of the details may be muddied, the story itself can actually be confirmed. We have found ostraca with names written on them, which confirms the story that they drew lots, and the unlucky winner have to kill himself, thus denying himself God's salvation after killing all the others. Several skeletons were discovered below the Roman siege ramp as well, taken to be rebels and given a proper Jewish burial. However, this one was probably pure propaganda. There was no way to identify the bodies, and given their location, they were more likely to be Roman soldiers. Of course, they could have been the rebels, but there is no way for us to have made this positive identification. As to the Roman siege, there is no doubt about that. Despite popular belief, Masada is not a UNESCO World Heritage Site for its importance in Jewish history, but rather because it's one of the few places in the world you can still see a complete Roman siege encampment. We can see looking below that there are 6 military camps, these neat squares which the soldiers made camp in. You can also still walk up this siege ramp, which, while I do recommend it, you should note it's a long drive from the main entrance. You have to go all the way around a rod, which I discussed in my Negev video. From the main entrance, there's a snake path or a gondola. You know, the gondola is for if you're a wuss. And because this was originally built by Herod, who was quite paranoid, we can see his hand in this. This is his royal palace in the fortress, magazines which would be used for storage, and a bathhouse. This was built with all the needs for the modern, lazy, rich Roman.
This also reflects the region's Jewish nature. Take a look at how the architecture is built for Judaism, in particular these mosaics which keep to the commandment against graven images, and this ritual bath which is a must for all pious Jewish temples.
We're not even sure if Herod ever stayed here, though. Its water system was quite clever, though the rebels seem to have destroyed it. The desert is dry indeed, but it does get rain, and when it does, it would collect in these cisterns over the years. When the Romans invaded, the rebels likely had enough water to last them for months, or even years. Enough that it would have never been an issue. But at the end of the day, the Roman siege engines were too much for them. Eventually, the wind turned against the defenders, and the gate burned down, allowing the Romans entry. And as I said before, this was named a UNESCO site for the complete Roman siege fortification structures. This is one of the only places in the world you can still see all original Roman siege architecture, with camps and a ramp surviving out here in the middle of nowhere precisely because it was so isolated. And thus, Masada was abandoned, but it was never forgotten. There is a surprising amount to say about the sites around here, despite the intense heat, and when you're in the area, whatever side of the border you're on, it's well worth the visit. Anyway, that's all I've got for the Dead Sea for today. Thanks for making it to the end of the video. Please remember to like it and subscribe to my channel. The link to my Patreon is in the description below. And until next time, I'm the Archaeologist, and this has been The Travels.